Let's take it from me. Dr. Iruka has based her work in equity, dealing with anti-bias classrooms and doing research in ways to ensure that all children, are encouraged to succeed, but particularly that children of color are set up in a way in environments that lead to their success. Dr. Iruka is the author of the book Don't Look Away: Embracing Anti-Bias Classrooms. She leads educational professionals to explore and address issues such as bias, equity, low expectations, and family engagement to ensure culturally responsive experiences. Without further ado, please welcome Dr. Iruka.
Thank you so much, Angela. I'm so pleased to be here. Can you hear me okay? I make sure you can hear me. Okay. Thank you. I appreciate it. I know it was a mouthful, and it's Friday too, and we all have just been we're ready for our winter holiday break when we can get it. So thank you for having me. I'm going to start sharing my slides in a second, but I want to thank particularly Janelle Jamerson for making a connection, and also to Angela Hood Bogard for having me join you guys. And of course, I'm not on video. There I am. I was disappeared behind my virtual wall. So I want to just thank you all. And actually, funny story. I want to tell you a funny story. So I have not traveled since late February. The last place I was at actually was at Flint. Actually, I was in the county at another literacy network event. So the last place I was in Michigan, and I actually worked in Michigan at high school for 2.5 years while I lived in North Carolina. So I want to say that I'm glad to be with y'all, even if it's virtual. And hopefully I can join you again if I'm so invited next year or the year after when we are all safe to be together. So with that, can I just share an access so I can share my screen, please? Thank you. So I am at the University of North Carolina, and I just actually came back. Before that, I was at High Scope Education Research Foundation, right there in IFC. Um, and and I was the chief research officer there. So obviously and I still actually connected to some organizations there. So I am very, very pleased to be talking with you all. And I love that. Thank you. You shared a really good video about what is equality versus equity, and a couple of things I want to know. I want to kind of just share with y'all because I'm here, talking to you because I get the stage. Is the video, especially the one with the fence. I'm always like, part of it is, yes, it's equality, it's equity, but it's also dismantling racism. So I would say another part of what I do a lot is to think about, issues of racism, and racism is kind of the big racial equity. To me, there's a lot of equity issues, whether geography, whether gender related, whether LGBTQIA plus. So there's a lot of different equity issues. But I would say the biggest thing that as a country that we have to fully understand and engage with is really around racism and really addressing racial equity. And that's really the foundation of my work. And even the book, thank you for sharing the book that I published with colleagues in April 2020, is part of it is talking about the racial history of the US. So I wanted to make sure you can see my screen. Um, okay, you can see my screen okay? My slides okay? Good, perfect. Thank you very much, Angela. So I wanted to first make sure that we're on the same page about racism. And it does connect to what I loved about the video you shared about equality versus equity, which is first that racism, just like equity, really is an issue about institutional power. And racism is really is both the institutional power, really around, I would say again, white supremacy and just whiteness writ large. Again, not about individuals, but it's about an institution, and the oppression and denigration based really on skin color. So it's actually both. It's not one or the other. It's actually both. And so the video, which I thought was really well designed and I think really articulated well, is really the end of it. We want to get rid of the fence. We want to get rid of the fence so that there's no need to go do all this adjustment. It means that we're able to meet people's needs who may have disability, people who may not speak English, women, people with different identities. That's what we're trying to do. But we have to understand that racism is really how this country was built. And that means that, white people and people who look white, or those who really about whiteness, that they are considered really superior. They're considered as everything that we should all are worthy or intelligent. So everything about whiteness really across the world is viewed as best, and everybody else is actually viewed as less. And it does operate at multiple levels. from systemic to institutional to interpersonal to internalized. Again, it's not about trying to blame white people, but it's about blaming a system that has been constructed to benefit a certain group and oppress another group. So that's one, right? And I want to make sure we also know what implicit bias is, because people kind of throw it around as well, right? Implicit bias is really is all of us have it. Every single one of us have it. Black, brown, Latino, white, everybody, all of us have it, because it's literally a cognitive process. As humans, we see so many things, and we have to organize it in a way that makes sense and makes it easy. If I had to literally remember every single thing about every single person, I really couldn't survive. I couldn't drive my car. I couldn't take care of kids. So it's really an involuntary process that's cognitively based. The issue is when your biases come out and actually negatively, or in some actually instances positively, affect people without you being aware of it. But how does that come together when we think about racism, inequities, and bias? So this is my history lesson, and you can challenge me if you want, but really it's a history lesson. So there's facts. So let's remember the country really was built on first the attempted eradication of natives. That's really part of how what we U.S. was established, right? Part of it was we tried to eradicate the natives, right? Hence why we have a lot of natives in sort of really specific places around the country, including in Michigan, right? So in very specific spots. And then on top of that, we then enslaved a group of people, Black people, right? And to maintain that power, we created policies that ensure that certain group of people who the enslavers will maintain that power. And that is done through policies and practices. So policies like voting rights, policies like access to loans, policies like residential segregation, access to education, resources, jobs, hiring. There were actually even the highway. Many parts of both Flint in Detroit, highways were built specifically to really, in many ways, destroy what I would say a lot of places where actually Black majority were doing well, but highways were created and constructed that literally disrupted the brilliance and the wealth being generated by Black people. Those are policies that were legalized. So those legal policies then created the disparities and inequities that we see today. So if we think about education, we see that if you were barred from accessing high quality education, resources, books, teachers, all that when you are barred from that historically, that leads to the disparities in education we see. Because you now have those disparities and all of that, people then associate Blackness or brownness with lack of intelligence, hence the eugenics movement, right? So now people think that everything Black or anything that's not white is less than, and then that primes us to believe those group of people are less than and are not deserving of access to equitable opportunities. That then creates policies that maintain that, right? Because now what our biases have now been completely policy created the biases and disparities, then the disparities that we continue to get primed in through education assessments, through television, through media, through all these things, prime us to always see a certain group of people a certain way, that then primes us to create policies that maintain that. So that's really the ugly cycle that we're in. And I would say part of our job, your job, is to disrupt that pattern, right? It's to disrupt policies that are literally that create barriers and create, inequitable opportunities, and to reduce the disparities and inequities that we have, whether it's to give people a shoe that fits, or remove the fence, or give them a box they can see the game through, right? We have to continue to challenge in our biases, because now we're like, oh my God, people are great and are excellent and are brilliant, but we have to kind of give them what they need to show the excellence and brilliance. And that means that we have to disrupt this cycle that we're in and have been in for 400 plus years. So I don't even have to talk about equity anymore, but again, it's to remember both is about both providing the opportunity as well as removing the obstacle. So don't provide me an opportunity if the obstacle is still there. That means that we're going to be working literally hard to do the same thing. And so that's why I say when you think about that imagery of the shoe or the imagery of the bike or the imagery of the baseball game, is to think about we have to do both, give everybody a fair chance, but remove the obstacles that are in the way. And part of the obstacles is actually us and our biases, it's us and our policies, it's us and our practices, it's just us, particularly us adults, especially for children, is adults that are in the way and adults are running the systems. And so that's important for us to know. And then I'm showing this figure not because I'm trying to get you bored because I'm a researcher, but I'm showing this figure, and don't worry about trying to read the boxes. I'll tell you what I want you to focus in on is that we have to recognize and know, for those who may not believe that racism is still here, or may believe that people are lazy, or whatever the rationale is, we have abundance of data that lets us know that your social position, literally your race, literally we can take your race and literally predict the outcome. We can take your social class and predict the outcome. We can take your gender and predict the outcome, right? So the fact that we can do that without even having, like, I can come to Flint and I know literally, I know what the black kids, I know what they look like compared to white children and Latino children. I can go to Detroit, I can go anywhere because it's that systematic. The fact that I can predict it just based on your social demographic characteristics of your race, that tells us that it's not about children. It's not about race per se. It's about the racism, the system that has created it to be a system that oppresses and does not provide all the opportunities. And how does it work? It works because we have your social position, your race, your gender, your socioeconomic status. It tells us that you're going to probably experience certain oppression, certain levels of discrimination, because that's how our country is built. You're going to probably
Right.
experience, you're probably going to experience some level of segregation, the
Yeah, he's sitting
psychological.
right here working.
Can you mute
Let,
whoever's talking?
let me pass.
Thank you. Um, so you're going to, so because of your
I'll
social
just pass you right
position,
over so you can talk to him.
I'll just pause. So because your social position, wherever you start as your race, your gender, your immigration status, all of that predicts your experience of racism, your segregation, where you're going to live. But I think more importantly to you all in your work is what kind of environments you're going to be in. So if you're in Flint, and we know national people, we have been talking about y'all for a while since the lead incident, if I should call that, it really the lead poisoning incident, that actually every urban sector has that issue, like still has it. I live in North Carolina. We have the issue here in Durham, in Greensboro, which are Black majority places. We see that the environments that are created is really a historical one, right? That certain groups of people are put in particular environments that either isolates them or poisons them or really is detrimental. And for us, and for children, that's actually important. The fact that we don't provide opportunities, but we may actually, whether intentional or not, poison them, whether psychologically, whether physically, or whether medically, right? The fact that lead, just to make sure that we all know, lead, there is no vaccine. Like COVID-19, we have a vaccine, thankfully. There's actually no vaccine for lead. Once it's in your system, it actually stays in your system and it's actually passed down generationally. And that actually has a cognitive effect on you. It can impact your behavior, your regulation. So it actually has some really harsh medical health condition. Now with COVID-19, this is a problem. So again, think about it from a historical lens. You understand that if that has been happening for a long time across generations, then we have to think about why is it that we're seeing the outcomes we see, whether due to COVID or other things, whether it's suspension, expulsion, imprisonment, health, all these things. Those have historical underpinnings and it's not because of the individual. So I want to just remind us and remind you as you sort of continue your work and engage together that we have to sort of be really serious about this. It's not about just today. It's not about the COVID-19 of today. It's about what has happened before from historically and how it still guides us and leads us and harms us today. And we all have to recognize that no matter your space, whether you're a reading specialist, whether you're a councilwoman or man, whether you're an educator, whether you're a parent, that all of us have some kind of power and we can use it for good or bad. And to me, when we're talking about racism, if we are not cognizant that we are trafficking in racism, and that means if we're not doing anything to disrupt the cycle of racism and bias, right, in our spaces, then that's really the definition of racism, right? You're either a racist or an anti-racist. You literally cannot be a non-racist. That again from Angela Davis, you're either racist or not racist or anti-racist. You really can be either or. And so we have to recognize our power in whatever you situate and our gatekeeping role. So I hope all of you all that are here, that if we think about our young children and trying to create the equitable opportunities, we have to recognize that some people literally don't even have shoes, right? Some people say, give them a shoe that fit, but some of us don't have shoes, right? Some of us are not even on the road. And so you have to recognize who is starting way behind. And that means that we have to think about the historical legacy of racism that literally has disenfranchised people for a long time, for generations. And we can't just put a band-aid on it and say, okay, now, okay, I've seen the light. I have the lens. What do I do today? But we have to be part of that is recognizing that and recognizing our power to then shift that. And so here's an example of what we can begin to think about. So this is, I'm an early child researcher. And one of the things that people have been talking about has been suspension and expulsion. A lot of us Black people knew that our kids were being suspended and expelled. This data is from the federal government. And I highlight the areas that I want you to focus on. And we are not, hopefully all of you all know this, right? That Black children make up 18% of at least a publicly funded preschool in the country, give or take. But they make up almost 50% of those who are suspended and eventually expelled. We're talking about 48-month-olds, we're talking about 36-month-olds, we're talking about young children, the space that you all are in as well, for so many of you. So this, and the reason is, well, is it because they really well not behave well, right? They need to be suspended. But I want to remind us a lot of the suspension that happens is actually subjective. Like, oh, this kid is a troublemaker. Oh, a lot of it is literally where you see certain groups of children as less than and as sort of dangerous. Again, we're talking about 40-month-olds, 42-month-olds, 48-month-olds as dangerous and need to be removed from the learning environment. And so we can say, yeah, it's because they're not well behaved, they don't deserve to be in the classroom or in the program. But we now know even more that it's not about the children, it's about the adults, right? We have a study from Walter Gilliam and his Yale colleagues that has shown that teachers are hypersensitive towards Black children. Adults are hypersensitive, particularly about Black children. Now, we know that children of color are suffering with a lot of things, but we have to pay attention to the anti-Blackness that is actually happening, especially with young children. In this study, what happened is that preschool teachers were primed, remember the word primed, I said about bias, were primed to watch a challenging behavior. And it was basically 4 kids, a white girl, a white boy, a black girl. They would say, hey, watch this video and then press this button anytime you see a problem a potential problem. At the same time, they actually gave them glasses to wear so they can track their eye movement. So what they found is that teachers were likely to gaze at Black children and boys. And then they were also, when they were asked, so tell me, who do you think really needed your attention? They're like, the Black boys. So 42% of the teachers were like, the Black boys needed our attention. The Black girls, they didn't really need this, right? But what it showed us is that there is a hypersensitivity towards Black children, Black boys being likely to cause a problem. If you actually watch the video, you were like, wait a minute, ain't nothing happening. There's nothing going on here. What's going on? But that tells you the hypersensitivity of teachers. That's an example. Again, it's not a blaming of teachers, but it's a blaming of the system that literally says that Black children and Black boys specifically need to be watched over, AKA policed. And so in all of our spaces, wherever you are at as an adult, is to be conscientious. Now make that unconscious bias come to consciousness and see, are you overly sensitized that you are anticipating a problem with the Black boys or Black children? Because it's not just a boys issue, actually, it's actually a girls issue as well. Is it that girls are just made invisible and boys are overly focused on visually, but girls are just ignored, Black girls are just ignored. So we have to begin to bring our consciousness to fruition, because now we know, because our hypersensitivity, we see the legal sanctioned murdering of Black people. So because that's why we have the thing called the school to prison pipeline. And so I want us to kind of be very attuned that we cannot disrupt racism. We cannot create equity if we are not aware of our biases and how it impacts the way we connect with and we engage with Black children, children of color, writ large. If we don't do that, we have to be literally aware. Who do you tend to quote unquote pick on? Do you publicly shame in class or in programs? What families do you say, oh, are lazy, they don't want to be part of this, I'm not calling them back? Really think about who do you feel is not worthy of money or not worthy of the stimulus checks, for example, right? Like, who do you think is worthy and who's not worthy? Again, and what color skin are they in? Again, we have to begin to raise up our biases, because once we're aware of it, we can actually work through it. I want to share with you a quick video to kind of give you, again, a sense of how is it that people see, how do young children see this issue, right? Because adults, well, we got our issues, we got to go to therapy for that. But for how do children really think about this issue of skin color? So I'm going to show a video. Let me actually stop sharing. So I want to make sure that my sound was actually, so you can actually hear the video. There we go. So I'm going to share the video, and then I'm going to get your thoughts on it. Let's make sure my video plays right. Here we go. I make sure you can hear. Can you hear? Hold on.
Quale bambola è bianca? Quale bambola è nera? Quale delle due è bella?
Questa.
Qual è quella bella? Qual è quella brutta? E qual è quella buona? Quale è cattiva? Qual è buona?
Lei.
Perché è buona?
Perché ha gli occhi celesti.
Quale è cattiva? Perché è cattiva?
Perché è tutto nero.
E qual è la bambola che ti somiglia di più? Quale bambola è nera?
È un figlio.
Hold on, Ari. Good job. So I kind of want to, you all can chat in the chat box. I can't see you, but I do want you to sort of think about, what does that video make you feel or think about? You know, are there certain sort of, and I should say I showed that video from Italy on purpose, because there's a lot of videos we have from the States here that have actually shown some similar, that, shown the same thing. But I want people like, oh, is this only in America? But it's actually a global phenomenon, right? It tells us that it's not just about Flint, Michigan. It's not just about, here in Durham, North Carolina, or California. It really is sort of a global phenomenon. And, for those who couldn't fully hear everything, basically what the summary is that children, of color across the globe often select sort of the black child, the brown looking doll as the one that's not smart, that's ugly, that's bad. And then the white looking doll is the one that's good, that's pretty, etc. And that's pretty much all what we see in the literature. And that's why I want to sort of, if you look at, and when you look at their eyes, you see this sort of like, yeah, this bad doll, I said it's bad, it looks like me, or I look like the bad doll and the ugly doll, and all those negative, or a description. And so it's to remind us that, children, they may not have the full words around racial trauma, but they know it, right? They know that, yes, this brown looking doll, while it looks like me, is how this doll is viewed, this is how I'm viewed, right? And that's something important we have to understand, is that children may not have all the cognitive understanding or the language, but it's one that has some lifelong consequences, right? If you talk to many adults of color, particularly Black people, you will hear all of the trauma that has not fully been recognized and fully dealt with, because the country continues to re-traumatize. Whether it's like the whack-a-mole doll, right, or the whack-a-mole game, you push one alligator head down and another one pops up, right? There's never an ending to the way people who are Black, brown, or indigenous are viewed in the country. And so it's traumatizing, and there's no worse for it. diagnosis for it, but we know how hard it is for children of color and Black children specifically to deal with all that is put on their shoulders. And then for families and then adults like you, right, who work with families and children, to be able to recognize that and make sure that children are healing and are able to move forward, right? We still need research in this area, but it is one that we know that it actually impacts children's health, their education, their learning, their sense of self. And I think that's something important that we have to continue to recognize. Um, and that's why I say racism is the biggest racial equity work that we all can do. And you all at Flint and the network could really do more in all your spaces to bring that to light, while also recognizing the intersectionality that people bring, which is whether where you live, your economic status, your gender, your religion, LGBTQ, all those things are still part of it. But when you put race over anything, we can see the detrimental impact that has no matter what. So what can you do to engage in anti-bias, anti-racist work, especially with children, families, and community? You know, from all the research and from work from, you know, Howard Stevenson and Penn and many other places here in North Carolina and beyond, you know, you can be the mediating institution that brings strength and that's healing. And what I would say the lens you should bring to that work is really around protection, affection, correction, and connection. That because if you know all the risk factors, right, and I use, you know, all the challenges, whether it's, you know, violence, low quality education in some spaces, fragile identity, as you can see in the video that children have, the sense of loss and trauma that all children actually, regardless of race, experience due to COVID, right? Whether it's loss of people, loss of routines, loss of that relationship, right? And so if you know all those inequities that exist, our job, your job, is to make sure that we are creating a village, a protection, of affection, of a correction, of a connection, that we are going to at least, you know, endow children and families with this lens. And what do I mean by protection? Our job should be, first and foremost, especially for our young people and our young babies, is we have to protect them from both physical harm and violence, but also psychological trauma. Racism is a psychological trauma. And so are all these other issues of inequities and also concentrated disadvantage. So we have to go through and protect children from poverty included, right? All of this stuff, because it disrupts children's well-being, it disrupts their sense of self, it disrupts so many things that actually has lifelong consequences. Second is affection, right? If we know that there's a lot of loss and trauma and a sense of I'm not good enough, right? That means that part of our job is to show affection, whether physically, but also just affirmation and caring and nurturance, right? So in whatever work you do, how can you show affection and affirmation to whether it's adults, right, parents or community members, or children? How do you show them that I am here for you, and I'm going to take care of you and show you affection on whether it's physical, whether it's social, whether it's even your own cultural identity or your gender identity, you know, whatever that may be. And we know that the one thing that matters for children in the research that we know is that we are ensuring that you feel like you are being responded to in a way that is really healing. And then correction, right? You know, our country is we imprison so many people, right? Our correction is not about, you know, rehabilitation or reconciliation or restorative justice. It's really about just punishment. So I would say what we should be doing with all, whether it's children, whether it's families or other adults, is around, you know, supporting people to sort of gain their humanity back. Whether it's children, it's telling them, hey, I need you to do this as opposed to that. I need you to be your best self. And you provide the opportunity for that, as opposed to public shaming or dehumanization, which is kind of what we tend to do with children and those who may not exhibit the behaviors that we think they should exhibit. So correction. And then finally, connection, right? Connection really is about how do we make sure, and that's, to me, racism, it makes you feel like you don't connect, you're not important, you're not valuable. So what can we do to make sure that people feel like they belong, right? Like, how do you ensure that children and others feel like I am unique in what I bring? Yes, I may bring some challenges, but I also bring this wealth of sensibility. I belong and I bring value to whatever the community or culture that I'm a part of. And so given the profound losses that many children of color and Black children in particular have felt over their lifetime, even, you know, as soon as they're born, we know the high maternal mortality rate. We know we have a high infant mortality rate. So there's kids dealing with losses of parents, of siblings, etc. So how do we make sure that we are really ensuring that children feel like they belong and that they are unique in the world? And then how can you do that? And so I just highlight a few things, right? One is we need to reduce the wealth, not just the income, but the wealth disparities. We have a huge wealth disparities. I've looked at, Flint and Genesee ISD data. They are huge. They're massive. They're historical. And so how do we reduce those wealth disparities, which actually happen over generations? Because wealth is about generational wealth and not just income. How do we eliminate environmental toxins? Again, I bring that up because of Flint. And not just even the lead, but even where certain toxin things that emit environmental toxins. Whether it's here in North Carolina, we have chicken and pig farms, and they're placed in mostly low income, but particularly Black majority areas. How do we make sure that we're not exposing young children during the most formative years from being poisoned? Because that actually affects your development over time. How do we continue to show affection, affirmation for people, and obviously provide children with things that matter for themselves as young people? And how do you provide autonomy and choice, right? A lot of times when you're poor or a person of color, your choices are actually limited because the system has created a limitation. Whether you get education, it doesn't confer the same benefits for people of color and Black people specifically. So how do we eliminate sort of these systemic inequities that don't provide the same choices? How do we eliminate exclusionary practices, right? There's suspension and expulsion, but it's also things that we engage in that makes people feel like they don't belong, right? Do we create, segregation in a way where it may not be legalized, but it's created by the way we say, you don't belong in this community, you don't belong in this organization. How do we continue to eliminate those exclusionary either practices, interactions that exist in many ways? And then finally, how do we make sure that we are creating assets, whether in terms of wealth assets or even assets in individuals and communities, as opposed to taking away assets, right? So how do we create that through sharing of information, resources, opportunities, networks like you all, and how do we do that? And then finally, I leave you sort of with this: how do you engage in that? Right? You can do protection, affection, correction, and connection. You can use that as your kind of your roadmap. But to me, part of that work requires internal work. I am on a journey like everybody else, and I've been on a journey for a long time, but I'm still on a journey because there's always things I need to interrogate about myself, my privilege, where I come from, all these things, right? And so I'm on a journey like everybody else. And I implore you to really think about what can you do to be richer and richer in this way, meaning that if we want our country to be fully enriched by all of the people and children that make it this wonderful tapestry, we have to literally eradicate racism. We have to eradicate the fence that oppresses, that separates, right? In all aspects, whether you engage as a whatever your professional work organization is. That means that we have to re-educate ourselves about the full history of the US. We have to remember the history, because if we don't remember it, we actually tend to repeat it, which we have seen a lot of times. So how do we unlearn some really bad things and really relearn the full history, good and bad, about our country and about our communities that you're a part of? And how do you integrate your work and your organizations in a way that doesn't put the people of color at the bottom and the white people at the top, right? And how do we integrate a lot of our work and across our communities? And then how do we need to critique everything, even when I'm saying you should critique it, right? How do we critique everything that we do to say, why are we still doing it this way? Why do we still have these policies this way? Why are we still engaging in these practices? We actually have to really critique everything, because I will argue that everything that we have done to date has not reduced any of the disparities. If anything, it has exacerbated it. And COVID-19 will be with us still for a while. And the ramifications of that is going to actually probably for some people, a lifetime. And so we have to critique everything. If we don't, we're actually going to probably recreate the inequities. And then I say, for all of us in the room together, we have to show a level of humility with our privilege, whatever your privilege is. I know I have privilege, even in my brown skin. I have privilege of having education, privilege of have a particular skin tone and all these sort of things, right? There's certain privileges, but there's also certain things that are not privileged, right? So I have to think about what is our privilege, and show humility of that privilege, especially in spaces where you have power and others do not. And then I say, part of your goal in your job should be erasing racism in all of its forms, right? You may not, control, legislation, but you probably control something, whether it's on the interpersonal level of who do you hire, who do you interact with, what kind of materials you bring to the work, whose faces are shown as having power. So there's so many things we can do to erase systemic oppression, small and big. We all have to literally be in this together. Like COVID-19, if we're not all sort of doing the same thing, we're just going to be chasing this virus forever. So we have to actually work together collectively to erase racism. And then finally, is to re-envision new ways, new approaches, new organizations, similar to this one, right? That we have to think about, what does it look like when we really are operating under the lens of humility, under the lens of anti-racism? What does it look like in our cities, in our states, in our country, in our world? What does it look like? So when you can envision that, we can actually do the work to actually make that come true. And so my take-home message is to your work has power, but I hope you use it well and not weaponize it. And your role should always be to figure out, how do I create protection, affection, correction, and connection for everything that you do in whatever ways you are. And it's not just about the work, but it's how you do the work through anti-racism lens, which is live the richer framework of re-educating yourself, of showing humility, of integrating all of your spaces and places wherever possible, erase racism and really re-envision. And then be on the journey, right? Even if you're like, I don't know, I'm not, I'm white, but I don't believe in this, or I don't, I have Black friends, whatever it is, just be on the journey. We're all in different places. We all know different things. We all have different experiences, but be on the journey. And that means reading, engaging, leaning in, because doing nothing is really condoning racism, because racism operates with or without you. It literally is here as a system. Um, and so I sort of leave you all with this, that speaking like this does not mean that I am anti-white. Again, I borrowed from our great scholar, our great activist, Malcolm X, right? And he says, speaking like this doesn't mean that I or we are anti-white. It doesn't mean that I or we are, that I or we, that we are anti-exploitation, that I or we are anti-degradation, and we're anti-oppression, really. So I think it's to remember, it's not about being against white people. And that's really important for us to know, that this work requires all of us, including white people, to really address equity in its fullest of forms. But it means that we have to think about how we're ensuring that we're not exploiting, degrading, oppressing people just because of their skin color. So with that, I thank you for allowing me to be in your space, allowing to engage with you as you all do really the hard labor and the hard work of supporting our youngest people in many ways. So I say thank you so much for allowing me this space.
Thank you, Dr. Iruka. That was so rich. I always learn so much when I hear her speak, and I thank you for your time. A couple of key takeaways, just for me as I'm taking notes while I'm actively participating here. Um, when you said the barriers for children are us as adults, that really, it was like an arrow into my heart. And thank you for sharing the video as well. I mean, nothing like an image to drive home the seriousness and the complexity of the work we do with children. We have on the screen here a quote that I highlighted from your book, and we will be using the book as door prizes. So we will be randomly selecting registrants from the registration list to share several of your books out after this session. And what I highlighted was a quote that says, "We often focus on ensuring that children have the same or equal experiences and opportunities without recognizing that in doing so, we're maintaining an inequitable system." So if we're just equal, then we're racist. So thank you for that. I appreciate you driving that home. And I know you have another engagement, so we appreciate you taking time and showing love to this great city of Flint. So maybe when things open up, we'll see you back in person. Right. And we'll spend some time, we'll break some bread and spend some time together. Thank you so much, Dr. Iruka.
Thank you. Happy holidays. Thank you, everybody.
So next up, we are going to go further and lean deeper into some think work. We are about halfway through our session today, and we have invited in an organization called Empowered 2. Empowered 2 promotes healing and wholeness in communities across the country by supporting organizations through the journey that Dr. Iruka talked about. So as we lean in, Empowered 2 uses social emotional learning competencies as well as mindfulness to set a foundation to encourage individuals, organizations, and communities to be empowered to love, empowered to live, empowered to lead, and empowered to learn. With us today from Empowered 2, we have co-founders Tui Roper and Lawrence Hood. Tui began her teaching career at the Flint Community Schools prior to moving to DC to become part of the education reform movement in the DC public schools. As a principal, she led with a conviction that equity in education is the civil rights movement of the 21st century. Tui holds bachelor's degrees in psychology, a master's in education, and an executive master's in leadership from Georgetown University. She served on several innovation committees for the White House and the Department of Education. She was a Life Changer nominee of the year and also received the inaugural DC's Excellence in School Innovation Award. Lawrence Hood joins us, and Lawrence began his career with Edison Schools as a teacher, national reading trainer, and as an administrator. He then served as school principal in the Lincoln Consolidated School Systems and later founded the Ypsilanti Boys Preparatory School. Pursued by the YMCA to open schools in the city of Detroit, he served as central office administrator and as the vice president of an educational nonprofit called Achievement Network, supporting over 900 schools throughout our country. He has dedicated his life and career to ensure that every child has a high quality education by every means necessary. Both Tui and Lawrence are Flint natives, and they've learned the value of education, and they know firsthand the inequities that hold children back. Please welcome to us today, Empowered 2.
Thank you very much. Thank you for allowing us to be here and be part of this wonderful group and be part of this panel. So thank you to the Flint Genesee Literacy Network. We're really excited about this opportunity, and to Dr. Aruka, who went before me. I'm so excited because there's so many connections between what she shared and the work that we're going to do today. So one part is she's talked about engaging protection, affection, correction, and connection. That's the work of SEL. So those of you who are not familiar with social emotional learning, or SEL, the acronym, we're going to dive into that. SEL for equity in education, and we're going to dive into it. But first I want to say SEL and social emotional learning is kind of that tag term that a lot of people use in education, but I know we have a wide perspective here, and that's why it's important to note that we really believe that it's not just about social emotional learning, but it's about that L can be social emotional living, loving, and leading. So this is something, it's not just like, hey, we do this here. This is just a way of being. So no matter where you are at, and no matter what profession you're in, we're all using this SEL lens. I'm a dad of 5 girls. I'm leveraging my SEL practices and competencies every day. I'm thinking about my own self-awareness, how to manage myself, what responsible decisions I'm making. So this is something that we live, and it's a way of being for us all. So if you can click to the next slide. And I do want to note that Tui is not with us today. She's actually the designer. I'm facilitating today. So she co-designed, and I'm gonna lead the facilitation on today. So as we click to the next slide, I'll just dive in, and I apologize because I can't see the slide, so I'm just gonna imagine that the next slide is up and you can see a picture of us. So when we look at this next slide, this is just an introduction. As Angie said, we are Flint natives and really excited about this opportunity to be here. But the main thing is, as you look at these slides, we've done the work. Tui, as you can see, President Obama has recognized her. He's put her in his speeches. She's done great work. She's been recognized nationally. I've done this work nationally as well, but I think the slide that I'm most excited about is opening the boys' school and seeing those young men that were considered to be at risk in the systems that we serve in. They were because parents were incarcerated. They were in special education. But the one thing that I'll note is, as we work with those young men, over time, right now, the oldest young man is a senior in college. And so we work with those young men who were in those young men throughout these years. And at the end of the day, they've all, 83% of those students who were with us at the Ypsilanti Boys School, they didn't just go to college, they received scholarships to college. And so that's the one thing that's very exciting. It's not about getting them to college, it's getting them through college and being lifelong productive citizens. So that's what I'll say. And the biggest thing is because we gave them knowledge of self. We identified them. We gave them opportunities to really engage and be part of the decision-making, be part of the community. And this is what TUI has also leveraged, not just academics and standards and all those things, but it's all about self. You see that picture in the middle where those children are engaged in mindfulness practices. So we're really excited to be here. And our goal with Empower 2 is to support districts and community organizations and nonprofits to really build their capacity to empower those that they serve. Because this is about being authentic to self while being mindful of others. So our goal is to empower you to learn, to live, to lead, to live, and to love and to lead. So we're really excited to be here today. So next slide, we're gonna dive into our agenda. We're gonna go over our objectives, community agreements, unpacking SEL and what it means. Again, this is just to wet your whistle, and we're gonna dive into a little of this work together in our breakout groups. We're gonna unpack an SEL, deep dive on responsible decision-making, and then we're gonna go into some next steps. Next slide. Our community agreements, as you can see, we wanna make sure that we're sharing the airtime because we're gonna have some time in breakout groups. We want some people to step up and some people to just take a step back and be mindful of that. Also, we want you to just really be engaged, maintain confidentiality because we may dive into some conversations in our breakout groups that will call for our confidentiality. So next slide, our objectives today: deepen awareness of SEL competencies through an equity lens, also understanding how our decision-making plays a role in dismantling oppressive systems. Next slide, and I'm looking at everyone here, and just give me a fist to 5. How comfortable or how knowledgeable are you of these SEL competencies? Either give me a fist to 5. One is a fist is like, I don't know anything about these competencies. 5 is I'm very knowledgeable. So if you can put it in the chat, again, fist to 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or you can just show it on your screen. I see a couple of fists. I see a 2. I see a 1. I see 1, 5. I see a 3. All right. So looks like we have varying degrees of how familiar we all are with SEL and these competencies. I'll just say we're going to dive a little bit deeper, and our goal is to move you up at least 1 notch by the end of the session. It looks like we have some folks that are 5s that are going to help us in our breakout sessions to kind of help us lead and have these conversations. So really excited about that. Next slide, past the why, but we're going to talk about the why. To the next slide where SEL works. So this is about SEL, social emotional learning, living, loving, leading, SEL. It is important for us to know that this is grounded in evidence. It's not just something that, is the new term of the week. This is grounded in national evidence, better social emotional skills, improved attitudes. Also, for the data geeks out there, with SEL strategies, we've seen 11 percentile gain across the board on standardized academic assessments. But we also know that some teachers have felt anxiety, some teachers have felt like overwhelmed, not just through this pandemic, but just as a teacher and educator in general with so many mandates. But we've seen implementing SEL strategies or these competencies and really living them out has really improved like teacher retention, because that's important. And as we think about those that we serve, we're all in a high stress environment. We all dealing with a lot. And this is important to really be mindful and think about these strategies and how they support us and support those that we serve throughout this. And so next slide, we're just gonna look at this next slide is what resonates with you. And so as we look at what resonates with you, think about this. I would ask you all, if you're reading this slide and you're a pretty quick reader, just jot into the chat, which one of these really resonates with you? As we think about SEL, we think about a community wide SEL strategy, and also thinking about SEL for educational equity. And the one that I will really point out, 1 and B, it says community-wide SEL, we have to think about that. And so one of the things is in partnership with families and communities is so important. This is not something like, hey, you do this, you do this, you do this. This all has to be a community-wide effort, and we cannot be in isolation. And we cannot negate the voices of those that we serve. I see a lot of B's and C's, but and so if I think about C, the one that really resonated with me is like, this is the opportunity. SEL is the opportunity to close the opportunity gap for our students, for all the people that we serve, and create more inclusive and equitable learning environments. And this is all about promoting understanding of oneself, examining our biases, and ensuring that our decisions that we make are thoughtful of ourselves, not just ourselves, but thoughtful of the ones that we serve. You'll continue to hear me say about the ones that we serve, because this is not about us. It's about our way, the way that we serve each other and the way that we serve others. So if we switch to the next slide, we'll just quickly go, a safe, supportive, equitable environment. We'll call on adults to, going all the way down to that last 2 bullets, create a safe space. It's important that we create a safe space for our children. It's important that they have a voice. It's important that they have agency. It's important that we continuously bring them to the table to talk about anti-racist practices. It's important for us to bring them to the table to have discussions about the inequities that they see and that they experience. So next slide. Real quick, we're going to dive into these SEL core competencies. We're going to take a quick glimpse at all of them, and then we're going to take a quick deep dive into responsible decision-making. Next slide. But first, let's look at self-awareness. Self-awareness is mainly about self-examination. Who are we? We already took a quick look at that social identity wheel, but this is all about managing our own emotions, understanding how do we show up into a space. But if we think about just that and then flip it to what does this mean for anti-racism and equity in education, as we process, think about the current pandemic, the racial injustices that we see, we have to be aware and hypercritical in identifying what things impact our emotions and what things impact those that we serve. So just being really self-aware of who we are as we enter the space. Next slide. Again, we took a look at that. We talked about social identity, but if you don't know, there's something called a social identity wheel, where you get an opportunity to not just engage on the surface of who we are, age, race, and things like that, but take a deeper dive into who we are as we explore ourselves. Next one is self-management. Self-management is all about self-regulation. If we think about self-management, how do we manage our emotions? How are we controlling? How do we manage stress? How do we think about all of those things as we are engaging as ourselves, but now we know ourselves a little better? How do we manage and regulate our own selves? And it's very critical as we all cope with like this grief and loss, and also we think about resisting our own implicit bias, our own injustices. As we practice anti-racism, we have to manage and self-regulate our own personal beings. Ways to do that in the next slide. And the way is all about reframing the way that we think, reframing the way that we show up. And it's all about, like, the one quick thing is just journaling. Journaling is a good strategy to think about us reframing our thoughts and also managing ourselves. So we're replacing replacing our thoughts with positive thoughts. Next slide. Social awareness. So thinking about social awareness is all about getting outside of self and focusing on the impact that we have on others. So, as we know, COVID-19 has hit and we're thinking about our children that we serve. One great example for me is like, hey, we all think about all these students who are now virtual. And I appreciate a lot of schools and districts thought about, hey, I may have a laptop at my home, I may have internet. Those are all privileges that we have, but going virtual meant that we all needed to make sure every child had laptops, make sure every child had internet service. So that's one way that we think about our social awareness, but also bring it home. Think about our own privileges that we show up with every day. And how are we showing those privileges in the policies and procedures that we put in place? How is that impacting others? Because we may say, oh, it's easy for everybody to be on camera today. But is that true? I just so happen to be a lucky person, or blessed. I have 5 children. If I had 5 children in a 1-room apartment, but we're talking about everybody be on camera, well, it would have been hard for you all to listen to me, because all of my children would have been talking to their teachers right now. But now they just have the privilege of being in separate spaces. But are we thinking about that as we're thinking about the policies that we put in place for all of our children? So let's click a couple of slides. One, social awareness is all about being mindful and listening to others. And if you are not mindful, you have to think about, hey, who's going to be my accountability buddy that I can always count on, that's going to give me the truth? You need somebody who's always going to give you the truth. And so that's called their accountability buddy. You have to be listening, not just for the next thing that you want to say, but listening for what are they saying to you? What do I need? So that's hearing the voices of those you serve. Next slide, relationship skills. That is 101. You can talk about knowing yourself. You can talk about self-management. You can talk about all those things. But I just want to say, if you don't know how to build relationships and don't have those relationship skills, not with just those that you know and are part of your core group, but those from diverse backgrounds, those who don't live where you live, those who are different races, cultures, age groups, then you're not going to succeed. We have to be able to build strong relationships across all boundaries, across all geographics, across all social identities. It is important for us to do so. So if you don't know, next slide, one way of building that capacity or building that skill is around restorative circles. And so that's something that, potentially we could talk about later. We can always come back and kind of lead some restorative circles with your team. That's because that is important for all of us to lean into that relationship building skills, and also as a strategy, restorative circles. So next slide, here we go. Responsible decision-making is the key lever to pull. You can do all these things, you can do everything, but when you are thinking about your decision-making, everything that you know, everything that you manage yourself, now you got to make a decision. This is about dismantling real systems that you see, real systems that you hear. And so as you think about that, responsible decision-making is, inequities exist. You know that you're showing up as a white female in an all-Black classroom. You know that. So now what are you going to do about that? What decisions are you making? What decisions am I making? Showing up in this space. How am I going to interact? And so, and also sitting in places where I do sit, where I sit in a position of power, and I know that. And so with that, how am I helping dismantle some of these systems? So as we move into this next slide, it is important for us. One thing is the power of the pause. We can't always be ready to move, ready to act, ready to react. It's okay to say, I don't know yet. Let me think about that. Pausing in your decision-making, because the first thing that comes up and comes out is not always the best decision. So thinking about the power of the pause, thinking about the reflection and always being reflective in everything you do and everything you say, because our decisions impact others. So with that being said, our main goal for this time together is for us to have time to talk to one another, because the power is in the room, or the power is in the Zoom. Okay, so this is going to be an opportunity for us to share out. We're going to hop into some breakout groups, and we're going to talk about, in this first breakout group, we're going to have 3 minutes. How has your social identity shaped the decisions you make? I said 3 minutes, I think is more like 5 minutes. 5 minutes, how has your social identity shaped the decisions you make? So think about that and know that we're about to hop into some breakout groups, and we're going to come back and share. It looks like we're still not in our breakout groups. Can someone help us move to the breakout groups?
I got you. Now, Lawrence.
Yes.
You are now a co-host, which means you can move freely between the breakout rooms.
Great. I'll wait till it looks like people are still moving into breakout groups.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Just so you have some additional people join. So they're still transitioning through,
okay.
but it's all smooth.
Sounds good. right, it looks like we're all back.
We needed more time.
I know. We're gonna hop back into groups in 1 second, but
Thank you for that.
we're gonna hop back in. However, we have a couple of people that we've identified to share. So what I want you to do is just raise your hand in the chat or in the side. Please share out. We have a couple people to share. We probably have time for 2 people to share out. And just identify yourself by raising your hand as a participant.
Hi, this is Carrie. I identify myself as a female and an educator, and that's definitely shaped the way I voted this year in our presidential election and local elections. And it also affects the way I choose to donate money, charities that I support. Definitely are related to how I identify myself.
Thank you for sharing.
Sure.
Danielle, do you want to share?
I'll go ahead and share what I had shared with my group. I'm definitely aware that I'm a blonde-haired, blue-eyed, kind of look like I'm 16-year-old female, and it's something that I've been very conscious in my work and my social circles, in my education. I always try to keep that in mind when I'm working. And again, in social situations, to keep that I want to keep my opinion back to an extent and make sure there's room at the table for everyone's voices and that diverse voice to be heard. So I try to navigate my world by making sure that everyone is included in that and I'm not dominating.
Thank you. We have time for one more.
Can you see me? Because I
Yeah.
can't. Okay, I can't. I'm having a hard time seeing people. Okay, so after you left, I kind of got an idea. I didn't, not just because you left, but I got an idea of what this question really meant. I identify as an African American woman who is in leadership, but also in leadership in ministry. So it puts different types of weights on you because you're responsible for people and also systems that have people go through. So that's what I wanted to contribute. Thank you.
We appreciate that. We appreciate you sharing. And
Thank you.
so again, there's the power here. The power is in the room for us to have these conversations. And I know it's like not an exorbitant amount of time, but we want to start the conversation. These are conversations that will, you're not going to ever finish the conversation. They are going to continue to live on. But these are conversation starters for us to have in our places of business, in our places of work, and even in our social circles. So the next question on the next slide is, we're going to hop back into our groups, and it is, what is your role in dismantling oppressive systems? Again, what is your role in dismantling oppressive systems? So if you could put that in the chat, we'll put it in the chat, but we're going to do another breakout group. You're going back to the breakout groups. Again, what is your role in dismantling oppressive systems? We have 5 minutes in this next breakout group. like our team is back. So we're really excited. So we're going to have a share. I know we're running out of time. Katie O'Neill, can you share?
Sure. Okay. I'm sorry, my window was being weird. So I was just thinking about how I've read some things recently about how the focus on systemic racism in like our public conversations it's allowed people to sort of give themselves permission to not engage because they think that racism is just systemic. I can't control systemic things, so I don't really have to do anything because it's a systemic problem. But really, our schools, our businesses, our organizations are all systems that perpetuate racism in many ways. So I feel like my role is critique, like just seeing that when it happens and not it when it happens, but noticing like the processes, noticing the ways that our organization does perpetuate racism in a systemic way and just calling that out and changing it.
Yep. I appreciate you sharing that. And for the sake of time, I'm just going to highlight, because what you said is almost a mic drop moment, like calling it out. And I think one of the things that you said was recognizing our power in the moment and kind of calling it out as well. I heard in another group, Crystal Black said, just showing up to the conversation is part of dismantling these oppressive systems. And I appreciate hearing that, because even as I look at the participant list, each time we went to breakout group to have these conversations, the numbers went down. People hopped off because they didn't want to have the conversation. And so part of it is showing up. It's not about just getting, it's also how are we participating and being part of the solution. And so that's important. I'm pretty much at time, but I just want to pull up the last slide. And the last slide is our next steps. Next steps is be intentional with those that you serve and helping them develop a sense of pride in their own identity. The second one is consider how your decisions will contribute to or dismantle systems of oppression. And the last one is what I want you to be mindful of. If you are not inviting those that you serve to the table to make decisions, then you are making a choice to make them part of the menu. I really appreciate everyone participating. We need to make sure that our children, those that we serve, have voice. Really appreciate it. The last slide, one more slide, is just saying, stay in touch. This is the way that you can stay in touch with us. This is our email, website, Instagram, phone number. Please stay in touch. We're willing to come out, support you, your organizations in the future. Thank you all very much. Appreciate your time.
Excellent job, Lawrence. I mean, what that last bullet, it was bullet number 3. Your statement was, if you're not inviting the people you serve to the table, then they are on the menu. Like that. Woo! Thank you so much for that. That's very inspiring and thought-provoking. We've had some great conversations. The chats I was in, right? People talking about sounding the alarm and giving feedback in that moment. Just in the interest of time, I know our breakout sessions could have gone longer and much deeper. This is the first of other conversations. So let's really be clear about that. But like you, I didn't want to create space today for us to come in and have a great conversation, because we have to walk the talk, right? So the equity work we're talking about has to live outside of the space we're talking about today. And so that's why we're offering a call to action. So we are calling you to action. We're calling you to join us. And much like you, I've sat in spaces where I thought, okay, that was great. Now what? And so we invite today, I want to introduce, next slide, Ms. Renelle Weathers from the Michigan League of Public Policy. Renelle is a community engagement director, and she is going to share with us an opportunity to step into a space where we can take a challenge. And this challenge is something that we can do as individuals or organizations. But when we talk about the work of equity, equity won't work unless we work it. So Renelle, thank you for joining us today, and thank you for being a part of the conversation.
Yeah, thank you, Angela, so much. And thank you for inviting me to share MLPP's Racial Equity Challenge. Just wanted to, hopefully you guys have heard of Michigan League for Public Policy before, but I'll just give you just a brief overview. Next slide. We were founded by social workers over 100 years ago around workers' rights for children. And we're still in that fight now to improve social and economic mobility for children and families in Michigan. Next slide. These are the research and policy areas that we focus our work. We have a staff of about 20, and we follow budget and tax policy to look how it impacts children and families. And we assess the merits of policy based not only on who it helps, but also who it harms. Next slide. In addition to our research areas, we also house the Kids Count in Michigan project. Kids Count is a national project with an office in every state, and it studies how children and families are doing using 4 indicators: economic security, education, health and safety, family, and community. And I believe Angela is going to provide you with a link to our Genesee and Flint 2020 profiles. As I mentioned, this is really a brief overview, and hopefully this will be a long-standing partnership. We'll have plenty of times to engage further. Next slide. The Michigan League for Public Policy's mission is rooted in using public policy and advocacy as tools to achieve prosperity for all people living in Michigan. As an organization, this has involved making racial equity a central value in order to reduce disparities faced by communities of color, especially Black and Brown communities. The League believes it is necessary to walk the talk, and Angela mentioned this earlier, internally. And this is critical to our ability to achieve our organization's overall mission. So why do we lead with race? Even when we don't say it, we are thinking about it. And if we don't address it, it continues to influence decisions without us even being aware. We don't lead with race to downplay any of the other factors like income, gender identity, sexual orientation, but because we know it's one of the hardest to address. And if we can think about the strategies around it, then we can transfer this lens to other areas to make improvements. Next slide. We've been on this journey for about a decade. And many of our partners were seeking a path to begin their own work. And this led to us offering the 21-day Racial Equity Challenge to our partners. Next slide. And what is the challenge? So it takes 21 days to form a habit, right? And so a 3-week exercise to help us cultivate self-awareness and intentionality. In order to walk the talk, we have to be intentional. Recognizing, understanding, and confronting our biases. Next slide. So how the challenge works. So you're going to complete some activities included in a daily prompt. So you'll get a daily prompt once you register. And then you can track your participations. There'll be some tools on our site. And also, I'm sure Angela will provide some other opportunities for us to reflect as well. And then think about how you can use those tools, insights, connections, right in your own work. And then to take those commitments and fulfill them by making changes in your personal life and connecting with new partners, just engaging overall. Next slide. So Angela's going to give you a link to register. And then beginning January, it's going to be on January 11th, actually the second Monday, you receive daily email containing a link to the day's challenge prompt. As I mentioned before, you'll be able to track your participation, and there'll be many groups on this site. And so you'll be able to go on an online forum to communicate with others or do your own pace. There'll be many tools to use, but also even though you get the daily prompts, you can still go at your own pace. And in each day, and the next slide, please. And can you go to the website? I want to just give you a brief demonstration so you see what the page looks like. And even though you get the daily prompts, which many people like and other people, don't, but you can go at your own pace. When you go to this website, scroll down. You can select the days whenever you want to. And there's several days of reflection in it. There's about 15 days of actual, there's videos, sometimes small articles. And also there's also links to other, if you want to go deeper dive into this, each day there's other things in there. So each day will have things for you to do and to reflect upon. Next slide. And so, yeah, so just closing, I want to just say, and I mean, this is a really brief introduction, but as Angela mentioned, this is called Call to Action, and will be other opportunities after us to share along the journey. And as the person of the league staff, we created an edit team, equity, diversity, inclusion team, to help keep us advancing our work and continuing on this journey, because this is us walking the talk. So thanks, Angela, for allowing me to share.
Thank you for being with us, Renelle. We really appreciate your partnership. And we know if you've not had a chance to check out the Michigan League of Public Policy's website, it is rich with as much data and as much information as your head and heart can hold. So as we begin to land the plane, so to speak, and wrap up our time here today, we're going to jump back into that Slido link. And I see that my team has provided that in the chat. We're just simply asking, can you share with us at this time one key takeaway from the time we spent here together? So just one key takeaway. If you'll drop that either in the comments or in the chat, we definitely want to share that as our closing reflection and as we think deeper. We started out today with a couple of result-based statements. We reviewed the vision and the mission of the Flint and Genesee Literacy Network. We raised awareness concerning equity and education. And lastly, we solicited and encouraged your commitment as a community to dig deeper into equity, specifically with the implications of education. The community is on board. The conversation has begun. Equity is key and it is a journey. Thank you very much. As we wrap up today, continue to fill those key takeaways in. We thank you for that. We are recording today's event. We will be sharing the video. We do apologize, as we understand, for some people that link to the Zoom may have gone to your spam folder. We do use an email service, and it may have found itself in your spam folder. So if you missed any of the depth or the breadth of what was offered here today, especially as we began the session, we will provide that video. We will provide the materials that have been presented here and house them on our website. And then we do have a contact sheet and a link information sheet that we'll be sharing out as we wrap up our session. So we want to say thank you. We say thank you as a network to the partners that made today possible. Dr. Iruka, Empowered 2, particularly Lawrence in your presentation today, to Renelle Weathers and what you've shared. Special thanks to Ashley Young and the Power Initiative. You don't see her, but she is the wizard behind the screen that has helped us to bring this presentation to light using the technology efficiently and effectively. So thank you for that, Ashley. And of course, thank you to our partner, Janelle Jamerson at EduCare Flint, who is the former director of the Flint and Genesee Literacy Network. Without your partnership and sponsorship, this event would not have been possible. Special thanks goes to our steering committee members, those that are listed there. We are extremely grateful for their guidance and their tutelage as we lift the work of the network. Special thanks to our staff. We have actually 3 full-time staff persons and 2 AmeriCorps members, as well as a work study student. I say that our staff is small, but we are mighty. So thank you to our staff for your tireless service and efforts. And last and finally, thank you to our funders and to our fiscal sponsor. Without your support financially, the network would not exist and the work would not be going forward. So thank you. And we look for continued funding. Next slide, please. Next, we will have our AmeriCorps Vista, Sierra Haywood, come forth and share with you an opportunity to provide feedback. Sierra, take it away.
Hi, everyone. Once again, we want to thank you for joining us for today's Community Connection session. To assist FGLN in meeting its mission statements and objectives, we ask that you please fill out this survey. The link will be provided in the chat and in an email. This is also your opportunity to sign up for our 21-day Racial Equity Challenge that will begin on January 11th. To access the survey, you can either click the link in the chat or you can use that QRIC code again. Once again, you just take your phone, you aim your camera, and a link will pop up at the top of your screen. This link will also be provided in a post-event email, and we thank you in advance for your participation and for joining us today.
Thank you, Sierra. All right, our time is over, right? I'm gonna give you 5 minutes back of your day. And next slide, please. As we say goodbye, we wanna be sure you have our contact information on the screen. Feel free to log into our website, follow us on Facebook and Instagram. And as we leave the session today, we wanna thank you for being the community that you are, a community of champions. And even though we face challenges left and right, we know that we will be victorious. To you, our community, we dedicate this song on the way out. Have a great and fabulous weekend, and we thank you for joining us.
I'll be the last one standing, 2 hands in the air, I'm a champion. You'll be looking up at me when it's over. I live for the battle, I'm a soldier. Yeah, I'm a fighter like Rocky. Put your flag on your back like Ali. Yeah, I'm the greatest, I'm stronger. Bet my dues, can't lose, I'm my own, yeah. Hey, I've been working my whole life, and now it's do or die. I am invincible, unbreakable, unstoppable, unshakable. They knock me down, I get up again. I am the champion. You don't know my name, you can't hurt me now. I can't feel the pain. I was made for this, yeah, I was born to win. I am the champion. When they write my story, they're gonna say that I did it for the glory. But don't think that I did it for the fame, yeah. I did it for the love of the game, yeah. And this is my chance I'm taking. All them old records I'm breaking. All you people watching on the TV, you go ahead and put your bets on me. Hey, I've been waiting my whole life to see my name in lights. I am invincible, unbreakable, unstoppable, unshakable. They knock me down, I get up again. I am the champion. You don't know my name, you can't hurt me now. I can't feel the pain. I was made for this, yeah, I was born to win. I am the champion.
Born champion. The C is for the courage I possess through the drama. H is for the hurt, but it's all for the honor. A is for my attitude, working through the patience. Money comes and goes, so the M is for motivation. Gotta stay consistent, the P is to persevere. The I is for integrity, innovative career. The O is optimistic, open and never shut. And the N is necessary, cause I'm never giving up. See, they ask me how I did it, I just did it from the heart. Crushing the competition, been doing it from the start. They say that every champion is all about his principles. Carry.